So after this most recent D23, I came out of this genuinely shocked. I watched the live stream on Disney+, and after being so cynical about Disney for so long, and dreading every D23 because I thought to myself, okay, now what are they going to roll on next? Now all of a sudden they start leaning into what theme park fans want and are now actually respecting the park experience? Oh, by the way, this video is not structured like one of my typical video essays. It is instead just more a stream of consciousness script I'm reading off of, so it's going to be a bit less refined than normal. Still, I wanted to talk about why this most recent D23 surprised me, and why it actually means that Disney might finally be turning the ship around under Josh D'Amaro. Actually, just a month or so back, I produced a video breaking down the new attractions that have premiered across Walt Disney World this summer, and it made me optimistic about the direction of the Disney parks for the first time since maybe 2019, before everything started to fall apart. I still haven't experienced the newly retracked Big Thunder Mountain, but I'm glad to see that it got the refurbishment it needed. I'm also a fan of the new refurb to Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger Spin, which refreshed an attraction that I thought was feeling incredibly dated, and while the interior of the Magic of Animation at Hollywood Studios doesn't open until September, I was actually really impressed by the new courtyard they opened up. It's very clean, inviting, has green space in a park that desperately needs it, and has the one thing I've been begging Disney to incorporate for years, which is thematic cohesion. Hollywood Studios, despite being the park best suited for random IP, has actively worked to get rid of the movie-making aspect that tied all of that intellectual property together. And by reinforcing the Disney studio as a broader theme, it creates a newer, cohesive thematic umbrella that incorporates the nearby Disney Junior show and the Little Mermaid Theater. Plus, the plans they announced for the interior of the animation building is maybe not for me, but still appears well thought out, so I'm at least optimistic. Epcot's Soarin' Across America is a pretty decent film, or at least one that I like despite having seen some people criticize it. And the real win for me is the new Rock and Roller Coaster starring the Muppets, which smartly removed Aerosmith and refreshed the attraction with a lot of humor, but while still keeping the core experience feeling very similar to what it was before. Oh, also there's the refresh of Smuggler's Run, which introduces the Mandalorian and Grogu, while still providing more interesting planets and missions to travel to. And while I still don't think it's a great ride because of how the ride system itself was designed, Disney did still make a genuine effort to solve the previous version's issues and give everyone in every position more to do, at least to the best of their ability within the limitations of the ride system. They acknowledged the issues it had and tried their best to fix it, is the point I'm trying to make. The only thing that I didn't like was the Bluey experience at Animal Kingdom, but it also feels very temporary, so let's hope that's the case. So, while this summer hasn't had the most dramatic updates to the parks, these changes were made relatively quick, which is very refreshing considering that under Iger and Chapek, construction timelines took forever. And what I'm also now seeing from Disney is thoughtful effort and care put into these experiences in a way that we haven't seen since Pandora all the way back in 2017. Actually, there is Test Track 3.0 from last year, which also caught me by surprise. I have a lot of things I would improve with it, but its return to classic ideas of Epcot about optimistic futurism is exactly what I've wanted, and it was delightful to see that return. And now with D23, Disney is actually listening to fans and is promising more of that? Yeah, you gave me a taste of what you could do this summer, and now have made a genuine effort to fix issues with the Iger and Chapek era. So, you know what? I'm mostly on board after D23 in a way that I didn't expect, because I was otherwise dreading it. I'm glad to say that I'm finally optimistic about the future of Disney after a really long time. So please leave a like on the video, subscribe if you haven't already, because look how close the channel is to 200,000, and let's get right into this. Part of what initially surprised me was that the theme chosen for the park panel this year was the Carousel of Progress, because if you kept up with the channel recently, I've expressed disappointment that the current version has closed. Not because I'm averse to updates, but because their actual plans completely abandoned the original time periods that I felt made the attraction feel very unique, but are instead reworking the core idea of technological progress into completely different decades, having released concept art for a futuristic Act 4, and introducing the show with a Walt Disney animatronic. I think that this is a fantastic idea, although I wish they would have shipped the old version back to Disneyland and updated it. But not only is Disney not replacing this with a self-gratuitous IP attraction like they did with the Country Bears, but they're acting like they're putting actual thought and effort into this. So to base the parks panel around an attraction that feels obscure to the general public really feels like the Disney company is now thoughtfully extending a hand to theme park fans, which is a fantastic way to start off. The park panel also quickly opens with a musical song celebrating Disney animatronics, with some unexpected representation of characters from Spaceship Earth, the Casablanca scene from the Great Movie Ride, and even the Ellen DeGeneres animatronic from Ellen's Energy Adventure. Just acknowledging these is huge, because under Iger and Chapek, who seem to actively disparage anything in the parks that wasn't merchandisable Disney character iconography, it's so refreshing to see that Disney is not only acknowledging, but is actually celebrating park history outside of just the latest new IP slapped onto a roller coaster. Yeah, this entire performance was corny, and I even opened Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it for the first time in a while to see nothing but negativity about it. But what's important is that this performance signals a major shift in direction for Disney, especially with parks fans. This is something we're going to continue seeing as they start announcing things. Also, I can't believe I haven't seen anyone talking about this, but when they brought out Tig Notaro dressed up as the animatronic Abraham Lincoln, it's actually wild that they made a Lincoln assassination joke, and there's been absolutely zero discussion on it. Go watch the performance for yourself if you want to see what I mean. The parks panel was divided into 4 parts, each paying tribute to the Carousel of Progress, and naturally, they provided concept art for the new version of the attraction. This scene takes place in the 1980s, and they didn't provide any detail about it, so there's not much to say other than I like that it's set during Halloween. They also announced that Mother would be played by Jamie Lee Curtis and Father by Bryan Cranston, both of which seem very tonally appropriate in their casting. So while they didn't say much, I think that things are already off to a positive start. Next, they announced that Disneyland would be getting back a previous fireworks show and parade, and DCA would return to showing the original World of Color, which is great if you like or have nostalgia for those things. But then, what actually shocked me was their Space Mountain announcement. Along with providing vague details about the rebuilt from the ground up Space Mountain Earthrise at Tokyo Disneyland, which I'm sure will be fantastic because, it's Tokyo, they also announced that Disneyland Paris' Space Mountain would revert to the original Jules Verne theming, and getting rid of the god-awful Star Wars overlay that was supposed to be temporary when it premiered 10 years ago. There was a rumor floating around that it might eventually go back to Space Mountain Mission 2, but again, here I am genuinely caught off guard as they're reverting back to that original theming, which was just so unique. Not only is that version of Space Mountain just so incredibly cool, but it goes back to that point I made about Disney now all of a sudden taking notice of thematic cohesion. With Disneyland Paris' Discoveryland being based around the science fiction of Jules Verne, it's nice to see its big e-ticket returning to the theme instead of slapping Star Wars projections into this building. And while we're at it, I hope they find a way to restore the 20,000 Leagues attraction to what it was too. If you weren't aware, it's a walkthrough of the Nautilus, but a few years ago, they replaced its impressive giant squid animatronic with a lousy looking screen. So while I haven't seen anyone talking about it with a new Space Mountain announcement, I would like to see the squid return because it might be up there as one of Disney's coolest animatronics. Moving on, the next segment focused briefly on Spaceship Earth, and I figured this had to happen sooner or later, because the ride system desperately needs a rebuild. You might recall that in 2019, that Chapek announced this refurbishment, but part of the issue is that he emphasized that they would change the theme to be about storytelling, which is just a code phrase for vomiting Disney IP into the attraction, as he literally showed the ghost of Moana's grandmother flying around in one of the scenes. Thank God this was cancelled, but it had to happen sooner or later, and now I think it definitely will with this announcement. They kept details vague, I think because it was likely very recently greenlit, but they announced the theme would be changing away from the history of communication and would instead focus on human connection, while emphasizing that the classic nature of the ride would stay intact. At first, I was a bit skeptical, but A, they've shown so far that they're actually putting care into the parks again, and B, actually, maybe it is time to abandon the communication theme of Spaceship Earth. While I have a lot of issues with the Epcot overhaul and the abandonment of Future World, as you very well know, I can at least get behind the idea that this new version of Epcot is about human connection across peoples and cultures, merging the optimism of the front half of the park with World Showcase, which actually seems to be what they're doing with the new Spaceship Earth. For all the issues I have with Connections Eatery and its superficial name, I have always liked the mural that they have in there that shows different cultures melding together. And so maybe this new Spaceship Earth could help transform the mistake that is the new Epcot core into something more interesting and cohesive. Also, while they didn't announce it, I thought I read a rumor that the center of the park might be bringing back the Fountain of Nations, or at least something like it, which would be fantastic and would reinforce this new theme they're going for if true. To finish out this segment, well, I did not expect them to announce that they would finally be fixing the Yeti in Expedition Everest after 20 years of being broken. Again, this just shows that under Damaro's leadership, it looks like the parks will be moving in a positive direction, and while there's no timeline for when this will happen, I'm inclined to think that's because this was another recently greenlit project, which could finally happen now that Iger is gone, especially since he so openly disdained this ride because it didn't have a cartoon character slapped onto it. I might say that this is the end of the announcements for this segment of the Parks panel, but there's actually one more thing that I want to cover. Returning back to the beginning with that performance about Disney animatronics, there's a Haunted Mansion portion where the hitchhiking ghosts come out, and, well, just watch.
In this whole hallway I'll sing my
Like
tune.
a Hatbox Ghost, you appear too soon.
Yeah, seriously, Disney World. Hatbox goes after Leota, not before. Raleigh Trump would never.
Again, this is something I haven't seen anyone talking about, but through the joke, they're admitting that they're well aware that Magic Kingdom's Hatbox Ghost was put in the wrong place. If you somehow weren't aware, the Hatbox Ghost should naturally be in the attic like he is in Disneyland, and the rumor behind why he wasn't placed there is because it would have required a lot of expensive structural reinforcement, money that Disney wasn't willing to spend, because again, under Iger, who cares about theming? A major narrative shift in the ride occurs after the Leota scene, where she calls the spirits forward to present themselves, because up until this point, you could witness how the ghosts were affecting the mansion but couldn't actually see them. So when the Hatbox Ghost was placed not in the attic but in the hallway with the floating candelabra, it actively takes you out of the story. Or it did if you were a theme park fan and cared about thematic cohesion, while you screamed into the void about it, because Bob Chapek's hypothetical Disney family from Denver wasn't going to know any better. So not only did they just acknowledge that they know about the issue by making a joke about it, but it also shows that they're actively listening to the theme park fandom, which I never thought would happen. It's obviously not an announcement that they're going to spend the money to fix it, but if they're restoring the Yeti, I think that putting the Hatbox Ghost in his appropriate place suddenly just got a lot more likely. It's not even an announcement and I'm already excited, but that concludes Act 1. Moving now into Act 2, this is where things begin to get a little less interesting for a while, but I still think there are some important points to make here. This entire segment is based around the slate of Marvel attractions that they're building across their parks, and they first started with Stark Expo, which I believe partially rethemed Hong Kong Disneyland's Tomorrowland when they converted Star Tours into the Iron Man experience in 2017. It looks kind of whatever, but then in 2019, Buzz Lightyear Astro Blasters was rethemed as Ant-Man and the Wasp Nano Battle, which truly sits near the top of the worst Disney attractions ever created. It's just so boring and stagnant looking, and then Stark Expo just got put on hold, so they finally seem to be tying everything together with their announcement of Avengers Tower, where you'll be traveling through different realms to help the Avengers. It's pretty clear that this is just a new take on the Tower of Terror ride system, where you'll probably be watching screens the whole time, so I can't really say that I'm interested in this. Maybe it'll be better than it looks though, so who knows. Next, Disney announced that instead of Avengers Campus, Shanghai would be getting an entire land dedicated to Spider-Man, which includes a roller coaster. I'm sure this will be fine, but if there's one big criticism, it's that one of the issues with web slingers, other than it just being not fun at all, is that instead of having you fight an iconic Spider-Man villain, your goal is to get self-replicating spider bots under control, which feels so painfully generic and seems like a missed opportunity to really flex the Spider-Man IP. What I'm seeing with this coaster is that they've brought back the spider bots again, and it just feels like making the same mistake all over again. Yeah, I get that the Avengers in the park stuff is all loosely tied to the MCU, and you want to save your villains in case you want them in the films, but you could have chosen even a minor villain, and it would have been way more interesting than just spider bots again. Act 2 of the presentation then ends with a big emphasis on the attractions they're building at California Adventure, where the big news is that they're casting a lot of the more expensive actors to premiere these rides, including Robert Downey Jr., which I'm sure is extremely expensive. we didn't really learn too much more about Stark Flight Lab, which is just a barely themed Kuka ride where various heroes talk to you, and it tries to simulate their flight patterns or whatever. I really wouldn't be surprised if this was poorly received. Then, Disney revealed the name of the e-ticket ride, which is known as Avengers Infinity Defense, where you again travel from realm to realm, helping the Avengers fight off Thanos. They did describe this attraction as mixing media with physical sets, so I think this could best be compared to Universal rides like the Jurassic World Adventure in Beijing or the Battle at the Ministry in Epic Universe. And from what they showed, there appears to be some Ant-Man themed ride scenes where you're shrunken down during the battle. I'm sure all of this Marvel stuff will be fine, but thematically, it really feels tired and outdated. I've just lost interest in the MCU because under Chapek, it was stretched way too thin, and everything from the movies to the shows all suffered from a drop in quality and lack a cohesive narrative to tie them all together. I know the latest Spider-Man movie is doing incredibly well though, and the new Avengers trailer, as desperate as it feels, is still seeing insane viewership, so I think the movie will still do very well. It might be the reset that the MCU needs to bring me back. Even so, the Avengers stuff in the parks feels very out of touch, and after how well D23 just started off, I have to ask, why? I think what we're seeing here are the last projects from Iger, because if you noticed from the first segment, all the good stuff was very vague on detail, which is why I think that those were greenlit under Tomorrow as recently as only a few months ago. I hope that's the case, and that this new direction under Disney Parks is done with Tomorrow's understanding that the parks are so much more than just a billboard for Disney intellectual property, but I think we need to get the remaining Iger-era projects built and out of the way, which is why all of the Marvel stuff feels so uninteresting in comparison. Moving into Act 3 of the presentation, you'll also see that it feels the same. This segment starts off with updates to Tropical Americas, and the first attraction they focused on is Indiana Jones and the Myth of the Jade Serpent, finally giving this attraction its name. Details here were pretty scarce, although they did reveal that the Indy animatronic would actually be based on Harrison Ford, unlike the figures of the Indy ride in Disneyland, and that this story would have you encountering an artifact that sends you into the underworld, where you would encounter monstrous bats, massive scorpions, and a giant serpent called Su Khan. They later showed a model to illustrate the scale of this incredible looking animatronic, or at least I hope it's an animatronic. But what bothers me is that this ride still doesn't fit within Animal Kingdom. They did state that Animal Kingdom is about animals, real and imagined, with an emphasis on imagined, but unlike the Yeti, which is based on real-world myth, and Avatar, which has strong themes of environmentalism that ties into Animal Kingdom's larger thesis, the animals in Indiana Jones feel like incredibly superficial lip service instead. While I've also been skeptical about the quality of this ride ever since it was announced at D23 in 2024, I do at least think that this will be a lot better than I initially anticipated, and what also excites me is that they described it as scary. I don't know if this was just played off as a joke, but an issue I expressed in the past is that it feels like Disney is sanitizing its parks of any experiences that could be considered frightening to really young children, like removing Snow White's Scary Adventures, replacing DCA's Tower of Terror with Guardians, or failing to retain the build-up to the drop of Splash Mountain when they converted it to Tiana's. I'm hoping that the new Indy ride is frightening, as it very well should be, but I have a feeling that they just joked about it so they could transition into something more colorful, which is the Carousel in Tropical Americas. I have nothing to say here, it's just a Disney IP animal carousel. And then they revealed details about the Encanto ride, which was named as Antonio's Fiesta de Encanto. While the ride apparently focuses on a lot of family members and their magical abilities, again, Disney Imagineers emphasize the animal aspect as you explore Antonio's gift, which is that he can talk to animals. Again, it's only a superficial relation to the more complex themes of Animal Kingdom's exploration of environmentalism and human relationships to animals, so I'm still not happy about this land essentially being Disney Plus metrics data dressed up in a Tropical Americas trench coat, but I think the land is best explained as being another project that was greenlit under Iger, and it's far too late to go back now. Speaking about the Encanto attraction specifically though, it does appear to be yet again another trackless ride system, which fine, whatever, but they reveal the concept art where the vehicles seem to be moving up a slope dressed as a staircase. Maybe this is just an illusion, but I have to say that despite my reservations about the ride's out of place and superficial theme, This scene will probably be very cool if it looks as good as the concept art promises. They also announced that the ride will have more than 50 animals, and a few were actually on display during the expo. What I really like about this is that most of these seem to have a lower level of animation to them, because a big problem I've been having with Disney and Universal is that they spend massive amounts of money on these hyper-advanced and fluid figures, only for them to often be malfunctioning, and also seem to come at the expense of more fleshed out scenes within their rides. Something that I really liked about Tiana's is that despite having many of these expensive animatronics, they supplemented their scenes with more simple animation too, which I thought was welcome. So to see it will be the same with the Encanto ride is great as well, despite my reservations about it fitting thematically into Animal Kingdom. Moving on, they reveal some small details about the Coco ride going into California Adventure, which has you entering a museum celebrating the career of Hector, and the ride will essentially have you going through Miguel's memories, recounting the events from the first film. This reminds me a lot of how in Frozen Ever After, it's framed as the trolls just retelling you the story, which I don't really understand the purpose of, but the ride could have just gone through it, and no one would have questioned why. I'm sure this ride will be cool, but in conjunction with a big expansion to Avengers Campus, at least DCA is getting a big boost in capacity because it desperately needs it, so that'll be nice, even if I'm not a fan of the thematic direction that the park is taking. Disney next revealed a few details about the Lion King Flume ride at Disney Adventure World, including a scene where Simba faces off against Scar. I think it would actually be hilarious if you going down the main drop is meant to evoke the idea of Scar falling off of Pride Rock, but otherwise, whatever, the ride looks fine. Just don't build it in Animal Kingdom and I'll be happy. Disney next announced the name of the Wreck-It Ralph ride going into Tokyo Disneyland, which is called Sugar Rush Sweet Rescue. I didn't even know this was happening, but I think it's replacing their version of Buzz Lightyear. It doesn't seem very exciting to me, but again, Tokyo always gets the coolest rides, so it'll probably be a lot more interesting than I'm anticipating. To finish out Act 3, they provided a lot more detail on the Piston Peak expansion to Magic Kingdom, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but they're actually selling me on it. I've had a lot of issues with them filling in the Rivers of America when they could have placed Piston Peak beyond Big Thunder Mountain somewhere, so that it doesn't wreck the theming of Frontierland. But if you look at the model, I have to say that I'm changing my mind on this. This looks expensive and very detailed, reflecting different American landscapes in a way that actually does enhance Frontierland instead of taking away from it. The geyser area with orange rockwork blends into Big Thunder Mountain, and the mountain peaks and waterfalls will add great dramatic scenery along Frontierland's main row of shops and Pecos Bill. I was wrong to doubt the effort that would be put into this, but the model also confirms my biggest fear, which is that despite the new scenic elements it provides, you'll still be able to see people riding in cars along the pathways. I think if this were hidden in its own little area, which enhances the landscapes of Frontierland, without being overtly cars themed, I would be a lot happier, but being able to see people ride by as they off-road through mountain trails just clashes with the Wild West theme that I really used to enjoy here. As far as ride details go, they really seem to be emphasizing the off-road race experience as you travel through different types of dynamic terrain, which I think does look pretty fun, and it also appears that there will be a lot of animation with moving characters along the ride track too. There are a few points where the cars go inside of the mountains, which I hope will include dark ride scenes, but even if not, I think I'm still sold on this in a way that I didn't expect. If I can make one request from Disney, please just hide the ride track from the rest of Frontierland. What I also didn't expect to really like either was the Flat Ride, which was announced as Miss Fritter's Daredevil Spin-Along. In Cars 3, Miss Fritter is a participant in a savage race that's kind of like a take on a demolition derby, and appropriately, the Flat Ride here is actually a model called a Demolition Derby, which will also feature a full-scale Miss Fritter animatronic that must be very cool to see in person. They could have just put the Flat Ride in, but the animatronic signals that Disney went above and beyond what they really needed to do, which gives me faith that Piston Peak will actually be fantastic. Again, I did not expect to learn more about this project in a way that changed my mind, but I'm glad it did. Moving now into Act 4, this segment begins with announcements for Disney Cruise Line. I haven't experienced any of their ships myself yet, but I did find it amusing how bored the audience was here. There were a few moments where they expected people to clap and cheer, but were met with silence by the 14,000 people in attendance. And after seeing reviews of how Disney's newer ships are built with cheap material and feel incredibly superficial, among a myriad of other problems compared to their older ships from the Eisner era, it doesn't surprise me that the segment fell flat with people. Maybe once they debut the rest of their planned ships, tomorrow could fix a lot of the issues Disney Cruise Line has been having, but for now, we're stuck with mediocrity, and the blame falls squarely on Iger and Chapek. Returning back to the parks, the next announcement was that Monstropolis will open at Hollywood Studios next year, although the door coaster won't be ready until later. I'm guessing probably spring 2028 at the earliest. They talked a bit about the theater show, but provided few details on what it actually entailed, but did emphasize that the land would be alive with what they described as dynamic movements, as they showed the former Muppets fountain will be retained, but obviously with a Monstropolis theme. I hope that dynamic movements means that they'll also have kinetic motion throughout the land, like you can see all over Epic Universe with animatronic characters or moving objects. I don't know why they kept it vague, but it seems they're putting a lot of thought into this, which again leaves me feeling optimistic. They also briefly spoke about Harryhausen's, the sushi restaurant from Monsters Inc., and it will have an animatronic of the sushi chef octopus, which again is very cool and shows that Disney is going above and beyond with these projects. If this land was built 5 years ago, he would have been a screen, but no, he's a real figure. While they also revealed little about the coaster, the one big piece of news they released is that once you board on the platform, your vehicles will raise 40 feet into the air and launch into the Scare Factory. I still expect this to very much be a family coaster, but I was afraid it would be underwhelming like Slinky Dog Dash or Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. To see them putting this much creativity just into the dispatch, again makes me a lot more confident that they're actually cooking up something really cool here. I was kind of neutral about Monstropolis and the Door Coaster before, but Disney just keeps surprising me, and now I'm really looking forward to it. They next moved on to announcing that Villains Land will be known as, well, Villains Land, and revealed a little about the characters you can expect from their meet and greets. They also spoke about how the land's story is centered around a wishing well that was corrupted with an evil wish, which leads to the land you'll be walking through. Unless it ties into the narrative of the rides though, the backstory here seems completely unnecessary, but they did announce the 2 rides the land will open with, and they look suspiciously similar to something that I already proposed. Before Villains Land was even announced 2 years ago, it was long a rumor that was fueled by fan speculation, and so in a video that I posted 4 years ago, talking about how underwhelming and underbuilt Magic Kingdom's Fantasyland is, I also proposed a small villains-themed offshoot, which would include a Maleficent-themed roller coaster and a boat ride themed to Hades' underworld. Well, whilst not a suspended coaster like I initially suggested, that Maleficent coaster will definitely be built, and a detail they glossed over is that this will have elements they haven't tried on a Disney coaster before. I'm curious what they actually mean with this, because despite describing it as thrilling, I still expect it to firmly be a family coaster, but I think they could be pushing it to be a bit more intense than usual, and might even attempt some novelty track element, like a tilt track as we've seen with Gringotts, or maybe even a drop track like Hagrid's. It'll be interesting to see how this develops and how intense they're willing to make it, but then they went on to announce another attraction which takes place in the catacombs under the Evil Queen's palace. Here, you'll meet the magic mirror who will take you into different villainous realms, which will be a mix of media, or screens and projections is what they mean, along with physical sets. At first I thought, oh yeah, that's interesting. Look, a boat ride kinda like my Hades Underworld idea. But then people started to notice that this looks like the ride vehicle used in Peter Pan's Neverland Adventure at Tokyo Disney Sea, which in turn seems to be the ride system being used in Avengers Infinity Defense. So this may not actually be a boat ride, but will instead be similar to Universal Spider-Man or Transformers, just to give you a sense of what it's like if you haven't been on the new Peter Pan ride. If someone in Imagineering did actually take inspiration from my proposed ideas, and you're listening, please just hide a Poseidon statue in the land somewhere. That's all I ask. Just have it ensnared in the roots of a wicked-looking tree or something. Anyways, while details are vague, I think they'll do interesting things with Villains Land. And moving on, they stunned the audience with an announcement that Disneyland's Tomorrowland will be getting a complete overhaul, which if you've followed the discourse, you know that Disneyland fans have been asking for a very long time. It was promised that Tomorrowland would get new attractions, and will emphasize more open green spaces, but that's about the extent of what was said. Because, like other announcements from earlier, I think that this was very recently greenlit. People have been speculating that Disney might bring back the People Mover, which is wild but would be welcome. But I wouldn't be surprised if Buzz Lightyear or even Star Tours got a retheme, and I can definitely see a scenario where the Finding Nemo subs in Autopia are shortened or even removed entirely for new attraction space. Now I'll be interested to see what they do, and it's apparently been rumored that the Avatar ride for California Adventure was postponed for this instead, which if true, might be a way to quietly retire that project. I still think it was foolish for Iger to push for an Avatar-themed land in Animal Kingdom as a response to Universal's success with the Wizarding World, but at least a lot of effort was put into making sure that it fit that park and complemented its broader themes. There's just no way to justify Avatar going into California Adventure though, and if anything, maybe the concept for this boat ride could be adapted into a third attraction for Pandora in Animal Kingdom, which I actually think would be the best outcome here, especially since that park needs more capacity even after Tropical Americas opens. Still, I'm excited to see what Disney can do with Tomorrowland, and as the parks panel came to a close, they tricked the audience with a fake-out, opening a door and revealing the mysterious figure from the temple scene in the Great Movie Ride that was actually just the tour guide. Instead of a cast member though, they threw off the robe and revealed Dreamfinder, you know, from that incredible original version of Journey into Imagination from 1980's Epcot, and essentially announced that a new iteration of the ride will finally be coming. Again, no details because I think that this development is incredibly recent, but it's stunning that tomorrow's Disney cares enough to bring this character back, even if he's obscure to the general public. I only hope that the new ride captures the imagination of the original, but considering the quality we've seen throughout this parks panel, even for attractions that I wasn't previously interested in, I do think they'll handle this correctly. I think if I can summarize this D23, it's that I went in with the lowest of expectations because Disney has disappointed me for years. But now all of a sudden, in conjunction with the really positive slate of attractions they premiered this summer, they've signaled that they're ready for a major shift in direction that's more in line with the creativity of the Eisner era. As disappointed as I am to lose the old version, I'm still excited for the new Carousel of Progress. I'm happy to see the Yeti being fixed. I'm actually kind of stunned that they're restoring the original Jules Verne Space Mountain. I was surprised by the Tomorrowland overhaul, and I'm optimistic for the new Spaceship Earth and the return of Dreamfinder to the Imagination Pavilion. Even for the attractions I'm less enthused about, they seem to be taking a quality-first approach that has been missing for a while now, which was evident through their reveals about Indy and Encanto, and I'm still surprised that they sold me on the concept of Piston Peak. I certainly don't see tomorrow's Disney moving away from intellectual property, but not only are they clearly open to original ideas for the first time in decades, and have emphasized updating attractions while still keeping their core intact, there also seems to be an emphasis on thematic cohesion, instead of just throwing in random properties around the parks like they're trying to be Six Flags. Iger and Chapek caused a lot of damage to this company, and with some of these projects, you can still see Iger's influence, but I think Tomorrow did the best he could to at least elevate their quality, and I'm finally excited to see what's in store for Disney's future. I didn't expect to come out of this presentation with anything positive to say, but this was just incredible. So let me know what you thought as well, if you have any interesting points to bring up. Before I conclude this video, I do want to also just acknowledge the people who are either channel members or Patreon supporters, because ever since starting those, I haven't actually thanked anyone. It's not something that I'm trying to push, but I did just want to thank you for supporting the channel. And for everyone else, the best way you can really support me is just by leaving a like on this video, which does a lot to help boost its reach. I'm also incredibly close to hitting 200,000 subscribers, which is a fun milestone. So if you would like to help me reach it, I would very much appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button.